podcast back here in Chicago. We're live streaming. We're learning lots. But hey, talking to a lot of people here today as we talk about cannabis reform, hemp, among other things, and really what we can anticipate in the back half here in 2025. Next up, we've got MaryMed in, and we got Howard Schachter from MaryMed. What is your new title now with MaryMed? I know you had a couple changes. I thought you did.
I am, you're probably confusing me with Ryan. I am the Chief Communications Officer for whatever that means.
You had a promotion last week of the USCR as well.
I took on the Communications Committee Chairman role for the USCR. We are proud members, and I wanted to do more for industry-wide, getting message out and putting forward the reform that we need.
Nice. Well, let's hope we get some momentum as far as some of the communication with the Trump administration. I know a lot of people are asking and wanting to know where that goes. Before I get to that, I also want to recommend Vlad Bautista, correct? Good to see you. And obviously, AB is fresh off the flight from Florida, but good to see you guys. First, before we get into all this talk about the industry and the state of it all, you were here to give an award here this morning at Benzinga. It's the Bob Fireman Award. And for a lot of MaryMed investors, this was your original founder, CEO, one of the real OGs of the industry. So this is what Benzinga is doing every single year to commemorate his memory of Bob, a great guy to say the least. We had a few conversations with him in the past, but a really good person. But tell me what this award is all about and who really won it.
Yeah, well, look, I love our industry. I love what we do every day, and I love our company, but nothing gives me more pride and joy than what I was able to do today.
Okay.
The Bob Fireman Entrepreneur of the Year Award. This is the third year running that we've looked to honor Bob's legacy. Bob was our co-founder and CEO until he passed away in 2022. And when Bob entered this industry many years ago, he did it for two reasons. He knew the health and wellness benefits of this incredible plant, but he also wanted to right the wrong of drugs, the war on drugs. Bob had been a political advocate for decades. He actually marched here in Chicago with the Chicago 7. Tells you how far back his advocacy went. So anyway, Bob always believed that.
Really?
Oh yeah. Spent many a night in jail. So Bob always believed that you could do good while doing well, and that intersection. And so this award we created to honor his legacy, to find entrepreneurs in the space who have built successful businesses, but while doing so with advocacy and using their platform to do well. And so we could not be more proud and pleased to honor Vlad Bautista and Happy Monkey and all the great work he's done in New York as this year's award recipient, and we presented it on stage this morning.
That's awesome. So Vlad, tell me about the company and really the state of New York. Anthony and I talk a lot about New York and how it's trying to right the ship, but what have you experienced about the market itself in the last 12 months? Because we're hearing some positive momentum that's starting to turn around in New York.
Yeah, New York has definitely done it different than everybody else.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a different rollout because the focus has been more small and medium-sized businesses instead of like other states that thought that it was smart to ostracize people that used to be in the legacy market and not give them a path to entry. They were smart enough to create bridges instead of moats. So now they get people with those skills crossing over. They get people with those trade secrets crossing over. So, the organization over the OCM has been a little tricky with their rollout, but ultimately you see a much more diverse, robust market than you see anywhere in the country, because somebody like me that was in the cannabis industry for 27 years, been arrested over 22 times, did time in prison for cannabis.
Really?
Now is a CEO, and I own one legal dispensary in Manhattan, and I own one in Brooklyn. So now, instead of me having to go back because I wasn't allowed to be in the industry, I go back and create examples. So I opened up the first legal dispensary in my neighborhood where I grew up. I grew up in Harlem, but Inwood is not too far away. And now people see an example of what's possible. People get access to medicine, education, information. So that's the good part. The bad part has been, since it's never been done before, the rollout's been a little messy, has had its hiccups, but ultimately the pros outweigh the cons, because I think it's a great example of, like, we don't have to copy and paste what we've seen in the rest of the states in the West Coast.
Yeah, well, look, we've talked a lot in the podcast Anthony, just how the illicit market in New York, the rollout was, I'll being politely, but it just wasn't right the way it did roll out. But have you noticed, is there an increase of education and awareness towards a lot of consumers when it comes to something that's regulated, where everything's tested, labeled the proper way versus an illicit market? Is that gaining any traction?
It's gaining a lot of traction because me personally and my organization, like we have an education center inside of our dispensary. So it's an explorer screen that tells you about terpenes, cannabinoids, etc. Because, we have to understand that you have to have a balance of things. So what do I mean by that? One part is on the government to roll things out, but one thing, the other part is on us as entrepreneurs, retailers, and brand owners to do things that educate the consumer, because we know that the government, that's not their forte. So,
you think?
Right. I feel like it's our job to create, education events, platforms that educate the people in a digestible way. And I think that it's gaining traction because now, you start to see little things like they found some fentanyl and some cannabis and etc. So now people are like, well, I want my stuff lab tested and etc. and etc. So slowly but surely it's catching on. Not as fast as we like, but it's catching on.
With what you're doing now, obviously you've attained a decent amount of success in the New York market. We've heard a lot of horror stories from the New York market. As the market matures, are you seeing more stories such as your own and companies that are succeeding versus failing ultimately when the markets first rolled out and started to catch up with the times?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. So I have a lot of friends that's similar to me that went from legacy to legal, but also had, some business acumen, understood business a little bit. They're doing well, just on the strength of that you were legacy and you didn't do your research, and you just can't win like that because retail, let's put cannabis aside, retail in New York in any industry is brutal. When you add the most highly regulated market in the industry in the world and the highest overhead for real estate, you really got to be moving with the small margins that we have with a fine-tooth comb. So I think that it's a combination of all those things. It's not just like that simple because New York is unlike any market because of these factors that I mentioned.
And you mentioned consumer education. To be honest, it's not really something we hear a lot from a lot of the CEOs in the space. It's something that I've said is very important. How do you weave in consumer education within the brand?
So like I said, we have these Explorer screens that explains it all. So what that does is, people don't want to be talked down to. So that allows them to go on their own and explore. And then what I try to do is every time a first-time consumer comes in, the bartenders are instructed to give them a tour, give them a personal tutorial of that screen and say, do you know what terpenes are? Do you know what cannabinoids are? And etc. And that's our way of doing it. And to make sure that people start learning for their own, like, oh, terpenes, now you start learning, like you do with wine, you like Malbec, you like Pinot Noir, this terpenes is the version of that. And they're like, make it digestible and simple, not like too scientific either.
Are you planning to ride the AI wave with that certain tool and starting to really innovate it for consumers?
I'm going to be honest, anybody that's not going to at least consider AI is probably going to turn into a dinosaur because I think that it's just like, it's going to be part of our lives in a real way. So we can't leave any options on the table that's going to optimize the business.
Hey, look, when you're a startup company and you want to hire 3 or 4 producers in media, you can't afford it sometimes, but this is where ChatGPT comes in, right? So looking at my question, next one says, hey, Howard, are you married or happy?
I've thought about it, like with the AI agents, an AI bud tender would be perfect to add into the mix. If there's no bias, it simply sees your buying history, your patient records, products, and it's a solid recommendation engine versus the human bud tender.
So when you're looking at who is the candidate to win this award, you looking across the country?
Oh yeah, we look at every nook and cranny. We look at competitors. To us, it's about the right intersection of smart entrepreneur, hopefully somebody that's done it on their own. It doesn't have heavy, serious funding behind them, but really takes seriously the platform to build their business, and that's okay. Commerce is okay. We're all here at the end of the day to do good while doing well. So it's that intersection of successful entrepreneur who has not forgotten about their responsibility to the community.
So when I look at you and your background, communications, and we talk about education, what Vlad just said, you worked with some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies. Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but you were actually the guy behind the whole production studio of the commercial of Larry Bird and not Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan back in.
You're in Chicago.
I know. Sorry, I just butchered that. But what was that? Early '90s, off
92.
the backboard, nothing but net.
Nothing but net was the name. It was a Super Bowl spot. I handled the PR for it. I did not come up with the idea for it, but I was one of the very privileged few to be on set. And I guess what you're getting at that I'm really proud of from those days is, at the time, Super Bowl spots were a big deal,
right,
as they are today, but nobody publicized them ahead of time. And I talked McDonald's into leveraging that moment of the Super Bowl from beyond just the 1 minute would be on air. Hey, why don't we try to get some teaser press in advance and massive press after it, and brought Entertainment Tonight on the set, and Access Hollywood and USA Today and stuff. And so what would have been maybe 100 million impressions became a billion because of the press.
Your idea too, to have that 30-second ad for Acreage back in the day when you were with them for the Super Bowl, is it not?
Well, that was in concert with the marketing team for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we saw that as an opportunity. We created a spot for the Super Bowl called "The Time Is Now," meaning the time was now for legalization. Hard to believe that's 2019, but the idea was, we knew that CBS, who was the network carrying the game, would turn down the spot because it was cannabis, and turn that into a PR opportunity. Say, what do you mean? You're taking opioids and you're taking beer, but you can't tell the story of how this miracle plant has helped this veteran with PTSD, or this child with pediatric epilepsy. And so that became sort of a viral moment unto itself, was the hypocrisy of CBS turning down the spot.
So with all the drama that's going on in the cannabis and hemp side, and how there's a lot of people uneducated, we saw Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick come out, handed up a product that was fully regulated, saying like, that is a dumb question and we don't want this in people's bodies. You see entrepreneurs like Vlad that are creating jobs and doing this the right way. Knowing that you know how to communicate and send messages, if you're through to the right people when it comes to government officials, what is the key thing that this industry has to get better at, or really the key message that we need to put our best foot forward right now?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Look, at the end of the day, as big an industry as we are, we're still dwarfed by the bigger, right? The big insurance, the big pharma that does not want this industry to succeed. I would put alcohol into that bucket a little bit, although it seems like they're learning every day and obviously throwing money in and circling the wagons. But we are fighting a serious fight in terms of dollars, time, and resource and access. And so a long way of saying, I think the most important thing we need to do as an industry is rise the boat together and be one unified voice. And I think, fortunately, that is happening. I see that firsthand on the.
What makes you believe that?
Well, because I am much more involved with the U.S. Cannabis Roundtable than they'd ever been in this new spot, and the USCR is the merger of the U.S. Cannabis Council and the National Cannabis Roundtable have just merged. So you have two different factions of folks walking through the hallways of Congress, not always saying the exact same thing. So that's just one little example of the industry realized we're not going to succeed in getting our message to federal legislators by doing this separately. I'm hoping that this also translates ultimately, personally, to hemp and cannabis working together. This is, we're all one. At the end of the day, we're going to find a way for these industries to merge, commercially and regulatory. It's just natural that's going to happen. So I think unified voice is the most important thing. And then at a consumer level, look, fortunately, every single day, we've got more and more consumers coming into our space, buying our product, understanding whether it's about chronic pain relief or anxiety or sleep. This is a better way to go. This natural plant is a better way to go than opioid. And that word of mouth is spreading. I'm sure we all see it every single day. And that tidal wave is going to hit, right? Because it's going to be a cousin or an aunt or a kid or a friend of a senator who finally gets them to understand
something Anthony's brought up a lot. Look, when it comes to education regulation, Vlad, no better person than AV. He talks about it all the time in the live stream, but you've had a ton of questions and topics brought up around the hemp industry, and really, what do we see next moves because of what happened last week? But have you endured a lot of this stuff right now? Like, as far as what's your take on it right now, as far as what's going on in a lot of the untested product? But I understand how you're going to feel about it. but how do you combat it?
It's really difficult. It goes back to that education thing we said, but I think it's definitely causing a lot of confusion.
Right.
Because you get people that say, I ordered this online, THCA, and then you get also how, I've been around these circles around for like 7-8 years, how, cannabis was on a trajectory like $20 billion nationally, and then hemp on its own and these type of products created their own 20 billion. So now it's like it's fragmented. Consumers are confused, investors are confused, and then the government just says, let them figure it out, and it slows things down.
Disconnect
It's what
the
I've
state
seen.
and federal level, yeah.
It's funny. So on Friday with the hemp segment, I said, watch, you're going to get the WSWA to come out with a statement that are against the hemp ban in the Farm Bill. This morning, the WSWA put out a statement urging Representative Harris not to change the loophole in the Farm Bill. Alcohol wants hemp in low dose form factors. Basically relegate synthetics and any of the other garbage that we want out, but keep low dose hemp-derived THC. So, I mean, alcohol wants hemp to proliferate. They see the business opportunity.
Yeah.
And they're going to use their voice.
Yeah. We had some interesting conversations too last week. We always knew this, but why am I trying to blank at the top of my head? Parent company of Jack Daniels, Brown-Forman. So they announced 7% sales dip in their latest quarter, but they actually came out publicly for the first time and said it was because of cannabis. This is something we've talked about for a long time. I think a lot of consumers have thought about this, but when you actually have somebody publicly announcing this in an earnings call, their CEO, when you think about the change and the progress that you've made as an industry, I know it's easy to look over these things right now because of some of the reform frustration, but that's a key moment for somebody like that to actually come out and be transparent about that, is it not?
100%. Huge moment. I mean, look, there's a lot of alcohol companies that have gotten into hemp, others that have invested in our space. Obviously, most notably, Constellation was a couple of billion several years ago into Canopy. That sort of died on the vine. But yeah, I mean, look, we are at this incredible inflection point, right? Where I always believe that we are only in the second inning of this ball game, but we gotta get through it.
It just feels like it's been about an 18-year rain delay in the second inning. You know what I mean, buddy?
The problem is the first two innings have taken 15 years.
Exactly. Right.
I've seen it personally in the only 4 years that New York has been legal.
Yeah.
Because before we, Happy Monkey went to retail, we were sort of in hospitality. We had a speakeasy on Times Square.
Yeah.
So it was like in that loop of the child groups and all that stuff. All alcohol, nightlife, bar sales have dropped dramatically just in 4 years since New York went legal. So I can imagine on a national level.
30 and like I've got friends that have kids that are 18, 19 years old. This is Canada talking, okay, where it's legal to drink. But graduating from university, and none of them drink at prom parties. Like, none of that stuff. When you're in your early 20s as well, it's like you don't see alcohol consumption. And even in the mid-20s, late 20s, even early 30s, we're talking about tobacco this morning in one of the panels. What 25-year-old's picking up a cigarette this day and age?
None, but they're using those pouches.
Right.
Those Zins are selling like hot.
And that's why these tobacco companies are looking at research of cannabinoids. Like, I don't know if it's a replacement, but they're thinking about the future and they got to adapt. But
100%.
Anyway, so let's hold up that award. Look at that. Bob Fireman, Entrepreneur of the Year. Congrats. So if people want to find out more information on your company, where can they find you?
They go to happymonkey.com and they can find us all there. If they're visiting New York and Manhattan, they can find us at 151 Dyckman Street. If they're in Brooklyn, they can find us at the Fulton Mall, 453 Fulton Street.
You got a space for us to do a live stream at that place?
Definitely.
Or what?
We have a lounge in each space just for things like this.
I can't think of a better culture than
I know you always
Brooklyn.
get the red carpet everywhere you go, gentlemen, but I have the green carpet waiting for you.
I'm up for that. Okay, before I let you go, bold prediction, regulated market, New York. What's it on pace to do this year revenue-wise? $1.5 billion? That's nice, is it not?
I think 2-3 years, it'll be like $3 billion.
2-3. That's
because I
encouraging.
know, because I was in the other in the legacy market, that I think they're underestimating it. They say it's like a $5-6 billion market. I think it's more because, New York, 7 million tourists a month. The rest of the traffic from people visiting from other states and etc. So think it's much more than what people think. It's just like we were talking earlier. The legacy market is so massive there because of it that it's going to take a while to chip away at it, but it's way bigger than people
Well,
can
we
imagine.
keep hearing the mayor, the governor talk about the crackdown on illicit markets, but you're on the front lines on the ground. Are you seeing that? No?
I've seen waves. So what I saw was like at the beginning, it was out of control, like
I
5,000
bet.
legal shops. And then, when we got to like past 100 stores, they one day knocked down like 12 to 1,500 of them, but there's still a lot. And I haven't seen that them pick that up again at that scale after that.
All right. Of course.
I am curious in New York, are most folks buying on price and THC, or are they buying brand at all? Are they paying attention to brand?
That's a great question, Howard. And the crazy part
TDR
is
correspondent Howard Shacker with us.
that's a crazy question. And the crazy part is that unfortunately they're buying on THC and price, and like sometimes I have these national brands on the shelf, and I'm like, my inventory guy, he's like, that's one of the least sellers. A lot of the top sellers are New York brands. Like all the people that have spent all this money and all this marketing all over the country, like New York doesn't care. New York is like its own bubble, its own planet. They just care about what's going on there. THC price. Oh, is it from New York? But what people thought, like brands that were killing it in all these states would go there, not necessarily transferable.
I forget what the dispensary was, but it was like when we were there last year. We walked in, and the New York brands were all beautiful. They were great,
What was the name of that?
homegrown, good-looking brands. You didn't see like the 710 Labs and the Alien Labs and the Cookies and all of those brands. It was homegrown New York stuff. I sat there and talked to the bud tender for probably an hour, and they were great brands. And that New York's the market to where you can live off of that entire market. You don't need to go national.
Yeah.
I think cannabis is going to be localized to a certain extent in the future.
Be the IPA, right, of the future. Craft, high quality, demand the high price.
Craft localized brands.
I guess you have that to a certain degree with alcohol, but not to the extent of cannabis, you think?
I think that's what's coming. Flash forward, once we get past the reform nonsense and the industry really shakes out to what it will be, what the promise is, I think you'll have that select few. It's going to be like, what does a consumer buy during the week? He buys Bud Light. On the weekend, he might dip into an IPA, right? Liquor by the shelf during the week, higher end on the weekend. I think the same thing's going to happen with cannabis.
Good stuff.
I think it's going to be more similar to wine, where people are going to be like more regional, and people are going to be more of the palate. I like Malbec, or I like,
It's a good point. Very good point. Any words for Elon Musk and Donald Trump? All right, we'll call that a wrap.
The real housewives of DC, right?
Oh my, that's actually a good point. Well, listen, you guys were lucky to get lap mics. I feel like Phil Donahue here on TDR here this afternoon. But listen, more podcasts and coverage. Apologize for the technical issues earlier. We got everything figured out. So we got more stuff coming up. Howard, Vlad, appreciate the time. AB checking in on the flight. Got a big day coming up. A lot more guests coming up. So make sure you stay connected here at the TDR Traded Black podcast. Thanks, everyone.